Good morning, everyone. We are ready for the first X-Files of this year. The topic of these sessions are NIS2. With X-Files, we are sharing vendor-agnostic knowledge about different topics. We kick off with an explained version of NIS2. Later, we will have a more detailed session with experts where we will focus on different frameworks in depth, but today it's going to be about the NIS2 compliancy. With Explore, we will share more blog posts about our vendors and their take on NIS2. And to end off with Expand, it's actually a collection of all the talks, blog posts, and other collateral we used when creating these sessions. Out of the 100 people that are subscribed today, 37 already saw our first explained about NIS2. So the first part will actually be the same. It's a good refresher for everyone, but we updated it, the second part, with new information about the next steps you have to take to start your journey to NIS2 compliance. My name is Stijn van Hoof. I'm the manager of technology with Exclusive Networks. I've been here for over 6 years, and I've been in IT security for over 10 years. My main focus is actually managing our pre-sales team, but also the emerging technologies and evangelizing the channel with sessions like today. So NIS2, European Cybersecurity Directive. Where are we now compared to 2 years ago when the EU agreed on what NIS2 directive should look like? So it's important to know that a directive actually lays down certain results that must be achieved by each member state, but they are free to decide exactly how they want to transpose a directive into a national law, meaning every member state has time until October 24 to make sure it's a part of their national legislation. This is still not the case, so there's nothing definite at this point. However, the CCB's advisory role in this gives you a very good idea on what a company will need to do to be compliant. And so take time to educate yourself. We still have time to follow the guidelines of the CCB. Quick recap about the original NIS. Like we saw, it takes time for a directive to become part of the national legislation. Last time it was 3 years. Now it will be a two-year journey. And back then, you as a company were identified as an operator of essential service. So you were notified that you needed to be compliant. NIS focuses on 7 sectors. This was the first cybersecurity legislation in the world where national governments cooperates within the European Union and also enforce different security measurements. And if needed, they will also be obligated to report significant incidents. Why do we have an updated version? Well, because the 3 main pillars actually remain the same after all. They require national governments to pay due attention to cybersecurity. Not every country in the EU was or is on the same level of cybersecurity, so there is a need of a certain baseline. And that will help countries to strengthen each other with European cooperation among cybersecurity authorities. The third pillar is risk management, where the operators actually in the key industries of our society take security measures and report incidents. Cyber threats have significantly increased and we're getting more dependent on the digital domain on a daily basis. To address this, the EU increased the scope and brought more clarity, not only in scoping, but also in the needed security measurements, enforcement, and overall communication of incidents. So what's NIS2? During the intro, I've explained that now is the time to educate yourself and prepare yourself because it will be a part of a legislation in 2024. You as a company will have time to register yourself based on given criteria. It's a passive selection now, more about that later, but it's based actually means on the sector and other sides and the revenue of the company, which means a lot more entities. Also important is that management will be accountable for the security measurements they need to take. And we all know that we can take all the precautions in the world. It doesn't mean that there won't be an incident. If so, you will be obligated to report that in a timely manner. Quick recap on NIS and the scope, and because the scope actually is still in place for NIS2, because we're just going to add a broader scope. So healthcare, transport, energy, water supply, everything about digital service providers. Banking and financial is actually still for DORA. So DORA has even more specific measurements and is still applicable for banking and financial, and digital infrastructure. So these 7 sectors still remain the same. We're just going to add a few more, not a few, actually 8 different sectors. But what is important that if you look at the sectors, we're coming from 100 companies to over 2,500 companies, and also even more. We're going to talk more about that later. But all these companies also have to do what's called supply chain risk analysis. So if you work with one of the companies who needs to be compliant with NIS2, they're going to ask you also to be compliant with certain measurements, which meaning is that it's a cascading effect that a lot of companies will have to be compliant. Okay, what is the impact on my organization if I'm part of one of those sectors? Well, it's a passive selection based on different criteria, not only the sector, but also based on revenue and size. But you also need to be but if you need to be compliant, what's the impact on the management responsibilities? What actions do you need to take, and how are you going to handle instant reporting? And if you're not compliant, you will be audited, and will you get fined or not? That's also one of the questions people have. Unlike in NIS1, you will need to register yourself online if you fit the criteria. And these criteria are the subsector or subsector, more specifically, your number of employees, and the revenue is also taken in account. So based on these criteria, you will actually fit maybe one of the 3 categories or none at all. But if you're in this session, likely you will fit in one of those 3 categories: essential, important, small, and micro. I've added an overview at the end of the slide deck together with all the sources. You will get a copy after this session, which gives you more detail about the sectors and the amount of workers and revenue. So you will need to register yourself as a company. It's like tax on web, same look and feel, but for your company to see if you're in scope or not. The managed responsibilities, you will need to be able to allocate the correct amount of budget and resources. So this is one thing that is for C-level, that they have to look at, okay, what is the risk for us? What do we need for business continuity? And make sure you do the necessary investments to actually cover that risk. So that's being proved by management. But also take the necessary steps to make sure it gets implemented. So they need to oversee it. And why do they need to oversee it? Because they can be liable on a personal level if they neglected their tasks. So that's new and very important. They will need to offer proper training. So security awareness sessions, phishing campaigns, continuous training overall is very important. But lead by example, so they also need to do that themselves. There's an interesting story about a CISO who handled a breach, and as you can see, he didn't handle it quite well. But that was really a result of also his bad management and judgment, because the judge sentenced him to 3 years probation and 200,000 community service. This was actually the former CISO of Uber, and he tried to actually cover up a cyber attack and even held some information from the authorities during the investigation. So it's really obstruction of a federal investigation. But it really shows you that there will be an impact on the person himself if he doesn't do what he's obligated to do. Risk management is a very wide topic. This only covers cybersecurity, because risk management is more than cybersecurity. And a very important part of risk management is your annual supply chain risk assessment. So for every company out there that's not a part of the scope, companies that are part of the scope of NIS2 will look at their supply chain and do a risk assessment. And that's important. Let me tell you a small story about this. There was a breach with Albert Heijn, which is a major food retail store. And they had no cheese actually for 3 weeks in their stores. Actually, the breach was not with Albert Heijn, it was one of their suppliers, but the result was the same. There was no cheese actually in their store. And it's quite embarrassment, because first of all, they're Dutch, so they like cheese. But on the other hand, they had only one supplier, which we were very dependent on. So that's not very smart. But also, Albert Heijn may have top-notch security, but it doesn't mean their supplier have the same level of security. That's why if you want to work together with them today, you need to invest and make sure you can also show that you have some form of compliancy that they are asking. So again, it's not because you're not in scope that the measurements won't be being pushed to you also. So we see more and more companies actually asking that from other suppliers and third parties they work with together. Everything should be documented, very good. So this is more the governance part, but the roles, responsibility, who has authority for what and why. All risks shall be documented and approved. So you can't say, yeah, we didn't know that was an issue, because they need to sign it off themselves. You will use threat intel. So threat intel to be shared also with other companies, with other nations. You can do that yourself. There's a lot of free threat intel available, or in a more automated way from vendors, for example. And also know your assets. It's very important. If you know your assets, you know what's business critical, you know their vulnerabilities, and you can also make sure it's identified and documented. In a live environment, this changes a lot, so there's nothing something you can do in Excel. You really need to have some point of tool to do that, to help you with. As you can see, governance is really a big part of NIS2. What are the security measures we can take? Well, education is one of them, awareness and training. Using technology is another. This is well documented by the CCB, and the needed basics like firewalls and segmentation, but also MFA on critical assets or baseline network behavior. We can actually implement a ton of technical measurements. But like mentioned before, governance is also a broad term and important in this too, because if you do the governance well, you will know what is business critical for you and where you should invest first and move along with your cybersecurity strategy. And remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Get to know your cybersecurity strategy and see what actually standard you can use to work on. And the road to compliance is hard, but it's important that you map that with your cybersecurity strategy. If you're on that path of certification, think about using an automated tool, because compliance should help and shouldn't be a burden on all departments. Of course, you should all be done within reason for the company's entire budget, and you can't expect a small transport company to spend millions on security products. Incident reporting. Okay, I'm breached. What now? Make a call or an email to the CERT with the first findings, and this is as soon as you find out, of course. For the first 24 hours. After 3 days, you should have an initial investigation to give you enough info for that initial assessment. And what is the impact, and are you able to already share some indicators of compromise? After a month, they expect a full report about the incident, so you can share that, so you can also learn about it, so you can implement better policies, strategy to make sure you improve your cyber resilience, not only for you, but also for others. That's why you need to share that information. So this is how the incident reporting looks like. Something about supervision and sanctioning. Just like with GDPR, there's a lot of talk about fines. Depending on the category, this is 10 million or 2% of your annual revenue versus the 7 million or 1.4%. Anyway, it's a lot of money. Okay, you will need to be compliant with security audits, implementation of policies, and so on. Biggest difference is that for essential companies, you must be able to provide this at all time, so before or after an incident. While for important companies, they only need to present all that information after an incident. But in either way, if you don't do regular audits and you do get breached, you will still need to provide the info. Essential companies will be audited without any incidents and be able to provide evidence or implement policies at all time. There's no real certification for NIS2 at this point, unlike ISO 27001. It's more like GDPR in that sense. It's a legal requirement, and organizations must demonstrate their compliance to national authorities. Big fines for C-suit as well for non-compliance. NIS2 has some heftier regulatory reporting requirements, and any significant incident, okay, what is significant? So that's flu, but any significant incident that is identified must be reported to the authorities in a timely manner. SOC 2 and ISO don't have that incident reporting requirements, but at least not specifically to any national authorities. Both ISO and NIS2 have pen testing and business continuity plan requirements. NIS2 seems to have a more continuous monitoring requirements than ISO and SOC 2. Aside from the above points, there's a lot of overlap between ISO and NIS2. Also important is that some people try to scare people to buy some stuff. Because if you buy this, you will be compliant. That's not true. It's a business strategy. It's a cybersecurity strategy you need to do. And it's a marathon, not a sprint. Where do you start as an organization? Kudos for the CCP, because they actually provide excellent documentation based on the NIST framework, but also mapped on SIS controls and ISO 27001. The 5 pillars of NIS1 framework are a solid foundation to start from. You can protect what you can't see, so identify is a first step and is key in security. Some examples: this document will give you a good foundation with a lot of controls and guidelines. Guidelines for the smaller companies to start with, controls for bigger companies to measure their maturity. And small and big is actually for Belgium. So for Americans, a small company is still 5,000 people. With us, a small company is really typical the KMO, let's say it like that, over SMB markets. If you are one of a little bit bigger company, I would advise you specific tools to help you with that guidance and with that road to compliancy. Also, first for verifying controls. If you look at this, when they say have an asset inventory in place, we have tools like that. For example, Axonius can help you with that. But if you're gonna look at the guide to the road to compliance of a certain ISO framework certification, I would advise use tools for that, like Drata, for example. Because you will need to collect a lot of information, which needs to be up to date, verified, and reported. Don't try to use Excel to do this because you will get lost. Having evidence of policies being enforced is also important. So if you want to do that in a manual way, a lot of work, you want to automate that. So sometimes they provide you with good solutions. And for example, with this one, they really say, okay, the use of an asset management tool should be considered. Other times they just say, okay, you should encrypt your data in the cloud, for example. They don't say this is a specific tool you need to do it, but the outcome is make sure your data at rest is protected. That brings me to the next slide, because although they did a very good job in mapping all those controls, how do you know what is important? Where do you start your journey? Because it's a journey to NIS2, and now we're going to look at that's something new, and that's NIST 2.0, the cybersecurity framework. This actually just been published 2 weeks ago. We're going to address this today high level, because we're going to do an expert session later this year where we're going to deep dive into NIST framework, ISO, CSF, SIS controls, stuff like that. The cybersecurity framework, or CSF, is designed to be used by organizations of all sizes and sectors. That's industry, government, academia, nonprofit organizations. So regardless of the maturity model of their cybersecurity programs. This is just out and is the successor of the NIST1 framework. And notice our 5 pillars still remain the same: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. These is also the 5 pillars that the CCP is using to map the controls on. What's new in this is the govern. The govern part is more and more important and will help you with every other core function. I'm going to talk more about these functions later, but how do you get started with this? First of all, we need to see where we are at this moment for our different functions. What is our organizational profile now, and where do we want to go over time? An organizational profile describes an organization's current or target cybersecurity posture in terms of cybersecurity outcomes. And these are used, they are used to understand, tailor, assess, and prioritize cybersecurity outcomes based on organization's mission's objectives, stakeholder expectations, threat landscape, and requirements. That's a lot of information. This is still high level, because believe me, this is if you go down this rabbit hole, you will get lost very quickly. So we will help you with the next session. Who will take this journey? And I think this is the most important slide of today. Getting ready for NIS2 is not a one-man or woman job. This requires a lot of effort of different people inside your organization. It's not just an IT problem. Preparing to create and use organizational profiles involves gathering information about the organizational priorities, resources, and risk direction from executives. The managers then will collaborate with practitioners to communicate business needs and create risk-informed organizational profiles. Actions to close any of those gaps identified between the current and the target profiles will then be implemented by the managers and practitioners, and they will provide key inputs into system-level plans. So you can see this requires a bidirectional flow of information between those executives who focus on the organization's priorities and strategic direction, and on the other hand, managers who will manage specific cybersecurity risks that could affect the achievements of those priorities. So it's really a group effort on this, not just one person. Govern, by the way, these screenshots come from the quick start guide of NIS2. We'll share all the sources we used on the last slide that you can get after this session. So this is a screenshot from the quick start guide. Govern addresses an understanding of organizational context, the establishment of cybersecurity strategy and risks, the different roles and responsibilities. In other words, this will help you to get your priorities straight on the 5 other functions. This is usually the part where security specialists are in for a tedious job because they need to provide a lot of evidence to auditors or other people responsible for the strategy and the requirements. Sneak peek for you today. Soon we will announce our newest vendor in portfolio, and that's Directive. Directive automates your compliance journey from start to audit ready and beyond. This tool will guide you in every stage when getting compliant with a certain framework or even a custom framework like NIS2. And because, like I mentioned before, NIS2 is not an official framework, it's like GDPR, but we have a lot of overlap with ISO, for example, so we can use that as a base and then just add a few custom stuff to make sure we have everything in place to be compliant with NIS2. It's automated, so scalable, which is necessary because governance is a continuous road. Remember the story about Albertin? They now ask proof from their suppliers that you're compliant with a certain standard. Directive has a feature which is called Trust Center, and that's actually where third parties can check the current state of compliance. So no more manual labor. We will give a lot more information at a launch event. So remember the date, save the date actually, 24th of April. With Identify, it's all about the organization's current cybersecurity risks and that they're understood. You can only know your risk if you know your assets. Thanks to Govern, you will know what is critical for your organization and your business continuity. And this is where you need to start with upgrading your cybersecurity and protecting those crown jewels. To protect those crown jewels, to identify these crown jewels at first, we did this for our portfolio. So we mapped this based on the CCB's controls. We mapped this to our portfolio. So you see we have a lot of different vendors on here. We have for IT, but also for OT. Could be used from SMB to big enterprises. So we have a lot of in portfolio different focus. It could be like the classic asset inventory, but also for software or the SaaS applications you're using. We also see that assets vulnerabilities is very popular, which makes sense because there are over 500 CVEs each week, which means you need to prioritize this for your environment to see what is most important to patch at that moment. Protect is about installing safeguards to manage the organization's cybersecurity risk and make sure they're being used in the right way. You know your assets and risk, now you need to protect them. This also means minimizing impact on a breach, which will happen someday. We are yelling assume breach for years. That doesn't mean we don't focus on prevention. On the contrary, taking the necessary prevention actions will minimize the impact on a breach. Identity is a new goal for attacker. It moves from on-prem to the cloud and it's becoming the most popular attack vector out there. Principles like least privileged, MFA everywhere, and visibility have never been so important. Zero trust is a term we all know well. Unfortunately, we still see many breaches because of broken access control or poorly or unpatched devices. Firewall and segmentation is a basic need for any organization with on-prem assets. We need to focus on education. And we have platforms that offer a variety of trainings, but also made classroom trainings. And again, wherever your data is, if it's at rest or in transit, it must be visible and protected. I can't stress enough how trivial yet important asset management is. I've read dozens of incident reports and podcasts, and so many times attacker came in through a device that IT wasn't aware of. And I'm very curious about the latest breach at one of our favorite breweries. What was the cause of that one? I'm gonna guess that something wasn't covered. It usually is. DLP, also important. There was a hassle before to classify the data. And actually, this is very helpful with the next-gen solutions because they're going to leverage AI. So that's the first time we used AI today. So they're going to leverage AI to classify your data in an automated way. In that way, you can really protect your data. Also important, have a fail-safe plan, which means backups. Test your solution, have a plan, have an offsite backup. Detect. The outcome speaks for itself. Possible cybersecurity attacks and compromises are found and analyzed. Key takeaway from this one is if you don't have enough inside knowledge, you should use a partner to offload this, all right? However, that partner will need tools. I prefer tools without too many alerts and false positives. But again, this is very specific and you have to have the knowledge and the bandwidth to do this. So usually it's a good idea to partner up with someone. Now we have a lot of different tools that can help you in the detection phase. With detection, we are in the assume breached, okay, which is very cool in the technological perspective, but it's assume breach, so they're already inside, which means we have to focus on different technologies to find the logs about endpoints, users, networks, and actually finding those anomalies. And this is where AI comes into place. If you have everything implemented, it's cool, but how can you make sure this is all installed in a good way? All those processes, are they running it like they should? Then we have a tools, for example, like Samolate, who can test your security stack in an automated way. With Respond, an incident response plan is necessary. When shit hits the fan, you want to have the good crisis manager. And it must be up to date, it must be tested regularly and improve with learned lessons. Also for here, an incident response partner is recommended, but you will have to have a plan. So most of the response part is actually for the incident response team. However, we still have vendors, SentinelOne, Fortinet, Palo Alto, will actually provide you with an MDR service to help you with the investigation. And more vendors are coming also because I think Vector has also become will add incident response to that in the future. And Tenable, for example, can help you with those vulnerability. Last part is recover. It really focuses on the assets and operations that are affected by a cybersecurity incident and make sure they are restored. So again, with governance, you will identify what's critical for your business continuity. So this is also your priority to recover. If everything's encrypted or whatever that happens, what is critical for you to recover at first? And this is a continuous process, meaning NIS2 is a wheel, so you will learn from your mistakes, from what happened, from mistakes of others, and then you can improve that to improve your cyber resilience. Assess your current situation, set feasible targets over time, and you will always have the current one, the target profile, and over time you will improve your cybersecurity resilience and your maturity. Again, it's a marathon, not a sprint. What you should do after this session is, first of all, thanks for staying because nobody left, so that's great. Because I know another NIS2 topic, but hopefully with some new insights. Keep on reading and following sessions. Take a look at the CCP fundamentals and see how many controls you still be able to achieve. We talked about compliance today, not a lot about security. If you really want to minimize your risk, you should also check your coverage on the MITRE ATT&CK framework. You will need to invest, and it's better to have two birds with one stone to be compliant and secure. Do the right investments. If you choose to go for a NIS 27001 certification, use the proper tools for that, like Drata. If you're serious about security, make sure you are able to identify your assets and vulnerabilities. And last but not least, come talk to us, talk to the partners, come talk to the vendor, reach out. People would love to help. Education is key. That is why we are organizing training for our key vendors. Take a look at our page to get more info. This QR code, I swear, this is not a lame phishing attempt. It's for real. So thanks for joining today. If there are any questions, feel free to use the question functionality. If not, thanks for joining and have a great day.